Welcome to the Cryptozoology Show with your host, the Cryptozoologist. This episode look at some early wildman stories and little known information to not known about the Patterson film, covering the history of it and some key things that show in the highest probability it's authentic. And we also cover about the Minnesota Iceman and some other odds and ends mixed in, some other wild men and things like that. So for first here, we're going to start off about a unusual sort of wild man way back in the sort of a day. Somebody asked me to record this again to because they couldn't hear it properly or something, and plus we're laughing quite a bit about the one of our favorite sort of cryptids out there, the Beast of Sep Shoots. But because I covered him in another show, we removed him off of this one, and we'll just keep it a bit more sort of on the serious side on this one. But I have a huge long history with this film. When it first showed up, I was walking with my old man in California, and we saw the posters on these sort of they'd put them on the posts all over the place, and yeah, come and see the monkey. My old man called him the Monkey Man and things like that. So I saw it then. Didn't see it again for ages until the next time I think was the Mysterious Monsters. And then also there was this PBS special. Maybe I don't even remember if that was before that or after. Anyways, they were close. They weren't far between each other in eras of time here, and it came on there, and then finally when the VCR sort of stuff came out, I was able to get this on film, and then I've watched it a zillion times since, right? Freezing every frame, talking to every sort of I interviewed Bob and Roger. I'm definitely the youngest interviewer in the entire world of Roger Patterson, and a sort of thing like this. Actually, a little kid here getting my mother to help track him down, and sort of and I talked to him on the phone for at least about an hour or something, and this sort of thing like that. And this film is beyond all the others combined. There's only one other newer film from Russia and a few others that are even remotely in the same sort of league as this. This is a one of a kind sort of a film, and the only other one that I would say has just as much credibility is this newer one from Russia, because there's no possible way, I covered on another show, that human beings can leap, 20, 25 feet, 15 feet, like every second, and be able to cover a football field distance in less than 3 seconds, sort of thing. It's not feasible. No matter what, a sort of thing like that. So no matter what anybody says, that couldn't be an actor in the suit. Also, another thing about that film, which is extremely strange, is this creature must have been getting older or something. He had this strange white skunk like patch on it. If anybody was making a fake film, you would have never put that in. I mean, it would take you a lot longer to create it, and there'd be no reason to create it because it makes it look not as good, right? Sort of thing like this. So I just believe fully, because I've seen older weasels, other animals, when they get a certain age, all of a sudden they'll start getting this whitish gray patches in certain areas, right? And things like that. So even though it looks strange, the bottom line is that this particular Sasquatch in that other film that I covered does not seem to be a Gigantopithecus sort. It seems to be another sort of wild man, the mink or whatever they want to call them over there. Almisti, I have no idea whatever variation it was, but it's definitely a Bigfoot like thing. So whatever Bigfoot exists, no matter what anybody claims, right? There's, like I said, I cover in the other show there, hundreds of year old bones that have now been found of whole groups of 7 to 8 foot plus giants. So they're only hundreds of years old. They're big and giant and furry. That quite often they got red hair, right? And even their skulls or craniums are sort of pointy, and everything matches 1 zillion% of all the sorts of things that natives tell you in many, many regions worldwide of the same thing. They live in the caves. They're wild, like apish to human people of some sort. They come out and they occasionally grab people, and some even do are cannibals, and some are this and that. So you can watch it on my other sort of show that, but this time we'll cover the famous Patterson film, and also I switched around and I show you some things that you won't typically normally see when you're watching these many variations of people putting up the Patterson film. I'm going to cover some things that nobody really mentions much or at all, sort of thing like that, and some other weird things about it, as well as because I used to talk with Rennie DeHidden a lot. He told me some weird thing, mentioned something about the film that is a bit strange, right? And this sort of thing like that. But we'll cover that later and things like that, as well as the Minnesota Iceman and some other things there. So, but anyways, we'll go in first here with. Some wild peeps. As I mentioned in some other shows, I fully believe that a certain amount of Bigfoot like creatures are actually were wild sort of people that somehow were, they were born in some village or something like that. They're over hairy, they have deformities, whatever, these kinds of things. All you need is when one of these guys is chased out of the village, or let's say there was a family of three or four of them, they can live 50, 70, 80, maybe even possibly over 100 years occasionally humans can do. So, and this sort of thing. And it doesn't seem to take that massively long for them to start getting a lot more furrier and stuff once they start living in this kind of environment like that. And it's very feasible to keep a population going for even thousands of years by simply, if you have a wild caveman or two that sort of was pushed out of a village, now 20 years later, they're pretty cavemanish, right? Sort of thing, still living out there. One of them comes down in the village, grabs some young lady, brings her back to the cave. Now all of a sudden they got the Brady Bunch going, right? And this sort of thing like that. So, or the Partridge Family, a bunch of Bonaducci's leaping around and these kinds of things, and great babies, and then the Marshes and all the gang, right? It wouldn't take long before all of a sudden now that's enough for that little group to then go out. One of them may go out to the village somewhere and grab some sort of lady. There's massive tons of people that disappear in forests every year that could actually, some of these may be responsible for these kinds of things. And especially in ancient, older times, people weren't as forgiving like nowadays. If somebody was born with the sort of thing like this, a mind-boggling piece of garbage that I'm telling you, just a side note, if you have sort of any of these sort of companies like these Bell and Rogers and all that, absolutely big brother garbage. You put it on pause, they'll restart it again 30 seconds later. So these sorts of things, they flash you every 25 minutes. Are you awake? All garbage. This Big Brother stuff has to go away. It's like, I mean, if people can't watch a show one after another without it asking you every 15 minutes if you want to keep watching, I mean, it's mind boggling. So if anybody knows how to get rid of that, I don't see any settings in here anywhere to get rid of these Big Brother lowlifes. They make me sick. I mean, I find this 1,000 times more. We're going back to caveman like these Bigfoot guys because our intelligence keeps dropping by the second. When I was a kid, when you turn on a TV, it would keep playing. And then the next show would come on, and then the next one. I didn't have to sort of flip a channel. I didn't have to do any of this sort of thing. Now I have to babysit the thing every second and tell it to now play the next one, and all these sorts of things. We're going backwards, not forwards. So, but the bottom line is that it's very feasible that all you need in a 50-year period, right, is any times that unusual sort of people were born, especially in ancient days, that had some kind of extra over hairy growth and these kinds of things, they turn wild, they live cavemanish a little bit. once they grab somebody else and bring them back in there, these genes may start spreading to them, and then all of a sudden you got interbreeding and weird things, and it may sort of it's enough to actually keep for hundreds and hundreds of years actually a little group going. As like if their immune systems were great, let's say, right, like they just happen to be freakish, but they had decent immune systems or whatever the case, and they might in the wilds start becoming more healthy, eating all these berries and weird things that would be out there, right? The more natural sort of diet and these kinds of things. It's feasible that these things doesn't take long for a, like, even like I say here, I grew twice the size because I was doing construction for a while all of a sudden, right? So, I mean, anything's feasible where it doesn't take much longer for a human that might have looked like a thin stick piece. All of a sudden, now he's a Bigfoot because he's working out all the time. He's digging for his food. He's doing this and that. And then these muscle and all these kinds of things may pass on to the next sort of one. And there's literally thousands of historic records of these kinds of wild people mentioned from that were even owned by kings and things like that. So for sure, this also phenomenon exists, especially in the European market, even more so than the North American market. And yes, there is a Gigantopithecus sorts as well out there, some kind of great ape-ish sort of thing. But a lot of these definitely are of sort of wild men and these sort of thing like this. So we'll first talk here about this interesting guy here, the wild man of Orford. This wild man of Orford showed up in after the completion of a castle of the castle there, and two Orford fishermen were out fishing and felt a very heavy tug in their net. Assuming to have caught a big fish, they pulled with all their might until they were able to drag the net on board the ship, only to find a man covered head to toe in hair caught in their net. Was said to have looked as human as any of us, except that he had an incredible amount of hair covering his entire body, almost like a cross between a human and an animal. The startled fisherman asked what on earth he was doing in the sea, but found that the man could not speak and merely grunted. And you find this in many reports of wild men that have been captured over the ages, that they mention this, that they grunt. And this is the thing is I don't believe they could have been a person that was lost from 5 years before. I don't believe this. These has to be the next generation after, or at least bare minimum sort of thing. So what occurs is some wild guy runs out. Yes, that one can talk and things like that, but maybe they have children, or the lady was raped and stuff like that, and the Bigfoot guy doesn't sort of maybe like her even speaking and grunts at her or whatever, just sort of keeps having children with her, and maybe she's so terrorized by the whole event that she doesn't think of teaching the children her language or any of these kinds of things. And it wouldn't take long before all of a sudden they're fairly sort of wild, right? And this sort of idea. But this a wild man of Orford was very well documented, and not knowing what to do, the fisherman tied the poor wild man up and took him to the castle, where the brutish knights sent him to jail, not caring for his inhuman always uh, uh, not caring for his inhumane there's something missing here occasionally. This happens here. He was treated poorly, and they questioned him relentlessly on where he had come from and how he lived, but the man would not, or perhaps could not, say anything. Even when he was whipped, he still said nothing, and the people of the castle became increasingly curious over the wild man. So they were all fascinated by him. And like I said, there's quite a few accounts of even in Transylvania and different wild men that were caught where, these kings and queens and stuff actually owned these sort of ones. There was Peter the Wild Man, another one sort of in all kinds of, I might cover a whole show on that sort of thing one time. But they were most fascinated by the way he ate the food he was given. You see, he was most interested in fish above bread or meat or cheese, and he would eat it raw or cooked without hesitation. Furthermore, he did not really drink water from a cup, but drained it from the fish into his cupped hands and drank it like that. This man was truly adapted to life in the sea, but how could he have survived, right? And this sort of thing like this. And there's even mermaid sort of people that have been captured and kinds of weird things like that. There was one guy that literally thousands of people apparently had visited this sort of these mermaids, and one of them was in a bathtub and actually was seeing them. Right? So there is water sort of apes and things like that has been reported over the sort of the centuries as well. So it's really hard to know exactly what this guy could have been, but he seemed to be sort of well adapted for the water. But if you notice in his feet here, it's not Sasquatch like. They make him more like a human, except the guy's furry. But if you notice, his hands are quite weird. They're making them quite bigger there and this sort of thing like that. Yet his feet or more narrower sort of thing. However, in the same English like eras and things, you will see some of them where they showed them they had giant feet. So depending on the wild man, again, this is what I'm saying is that some of them seem to be from some kind of race of ancient giant real Bigfoot like sort of ones, like our Patterson sort of lady, right? And this sort of thing. But then there's also these sorts that are also responsible for a lot of the sort of Bigfoot like phenomena. So whatever this guy was, like if he was some kind of one that just was thrown out of the village, he became used to fishing and feeding around water and this sort of thing and could swim really well, possibly, whatever, right? Just on his own accord, who knows, right? Then the guy might learn to adapt and sort of do these sorts of things like that. So these things are strange. Like, I mean, it's hard to know, you know, exactly what would have occurred here. But I mean, it's interesting, right? But one day the two guards took him for a swim in the local bay to allow him to bathe, but managed to overlook the fact that he was adapted to life in the water and an excellent swimmer. They put up a barrier of netting so that he could not escape, but it only went down a certain way, and he simply swam underneath it and away, jumping through the water, happy again. The wild man swam away after a moment of rejoicing and was never seen again, right? So, I mean, absolutely sort of a fascinating early sort of a tale like that. And there's all kinds of these in records of different sorts of kings owning everything from the orang pendek to, like I said, wild men of Transylvania. Right? So certainly a lot of places and things like that. So extremely interesting. For sure, this has to be part of the Bigfoot phenomena and actually real. That there's too many of these mentioned in historic records, everybody from Xana to all kinds of them, where there's these wild sort of people where they definitely are more like for sure closer to sort of us in this sort of way, right? Than the typical Gigantopithecus looking sort of ones and that sort of thing. So definitely it is part of our sort of Bigfoot sort of answer phenomena because Bigfoot is not just a Gigantopithecus. Bigfoot is many sort of things. It may be a Gigantopithecus in some of the types, but many of them are of wild people and other sorts of wild apes and other sorts of things out there, right? So, but anyways, it's a very interesting sort of early tale and that sort of thing like that. So, these wild peeps are quite interesting. But and next year we're going to cover sort of this Bluff Creek Beast here, aka Patty, the best evidence ever recorded for the Sasquatch, right? I don't know why every time there's always something. But anyways, this was filmed in October 1967 by Roger Patterson. Along with this native tracker Bob Gimlin. And before the film was done, Roger gets reports of two Sasquatch like tracks, showing then you would have to be very quick and to invent this suit. See, what had happened, a lot of people don't realize this. There was all kinds of stupid people claiming that he made this suit and all kinds of ridiculous sorts of things. But the real reason that they even went hunting and he got Bob to come along with him there to start tracking because of these tracks that were found. So again, you're now then having new people involved here either they made this somehow genius fake film that can fool even the greatest scientists, some of them out there, and things like that, or much more likely she was real. Okay, but the things is that there's too many things for this Patterson film. It's absolutely so good compared to anything else out there that the feasibility of it being fake is like near below zero for multi reasons, and we're going to go through across a whole bunch of these as we go along and things like that. And I'll show you the film going a different sort of way like this, and mention a lot of different sorts of things about it. But some of the key things that we're going to go on about here, the eh, depths were average of over 2 inches Patty's prints, okay, like, and some even way deeper, sort of in this sort of range. Horses with Bob and Roger on them only sink half the depth. So you have to sort of now believe that somehow if Roger Patterson in the beginning of this sort of film, you can actually see his footprints as he's running, okay? He barely goes in the ground, nothing, like about a tenth of an inch as he's running, okay? Now you have a creature with a much bigger feet. That means they'd have to weigh even way more, okay? That is sinking like about 2.5 inches or so into the sort of ground, okay? This would mean there is no way that this, in other words, whoever, if it was in a suit, they would have to have massive hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of more pounds here to now start being able to sort of sink in these kinds of depths. And considering that when they're on a horse, and so you got a guy with a big heavy horse, and their feet is way less in width than this great big long Bigfoots, right? And they can only sink half the depth. That would indicate that the actor would have had to been way again heavier here, and because horses weigh hundreds of pounds, right, and then you got sort of the person on it, right, the big people are like 300-400 pounds, and if anybody knows a 300-400 pound guy, very few can move really fast once they start getting up to a certain sort of size range, okay? So now the guy would have to weigh extremely more than 300 or 400 pounds. There's not, that would never cut it in a million years. You wouldn't even barely get like about a quarter of an inch in the ground, sort of thing like that. So whoever, if that wasn't a suit, okay, then this would mean that they would have had to have somehow inside them strapped massive hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pounds, right? And this sort of thing. So there's all these sorts of things about it that people ignore. Another thing is that people were right on the scene very quickly, okay? And by measuring the stumps and the different things that was around in there, they were able to for sure that the lowest estimate ever was by one person about 6'11", but most people usually say about 7'8". To about 8 feet. And for sure, I would believe it would be at least in this sort of range because Patty's never standing straight up. She always walks on sort of like this bent sort of thing. So she's never fully straight up. Plus, she's sinking in the ground every time, inches, several plus inches here. So then this is again, you're now, you'd have to add these sort of up there, right? And her legs would have to be sort of completely straight standing at the best sort of point, right? And this sort of thing. So for sure, most people will agree, of experts of different sorts that are very familiar with the film, that she probably was at least 7 foot something to the early 8 foot range in this sort of thing. Dermal ridges show in the prints, okay? Dermal ridges were not known about or any of these sorts of things then. So this would mean that Roger Patterson in 67 had to create rubber materials that didn't even exist at this point, somehow be able to then get a real Sasquatch and take their prints and then put it into the rubber suit and then put this in the hopes that somebody 10, 20 years later would be looking for dermal ridges. Okay, so you have to keep these things in mind. I mean, these are all here, these are 100% factual sorts of things. Both of them passed lie detector tests. I interviewed both of them. Okay, so this is another sort of thing here is that neither one of them would have ever known or could have known that somebody's going to ask them for a lie detector test right on the spot, and they both passed it. So in order for you to now be saying that the guy's a fake, somehow he has to find some lady that he can glue hair right to her body, or some guy with massive bigger breasts here that's built like yeah, 40 Hulk Hogan sort of thing like this. I'll show you all the muscles in or out. I'll show you other films that you can see on some of my other shows and that. Look at the difference between the two. It's laughable. All the rest, there is no muscles. They're fake suits. They're very easy to tell. Like there's a recent one there. It's not massively old. Some ridiculous one where some supposedly female Bigfoot and she's carrying a baby. That's the most fakest film I've ever seen. Within a billionth of a second, I can tell you 100% guaranteed. I would bet anything in this universe that you want to that that's a fake film. That the baby's fake, the mother's fake, and it's just some idiots in a suit, and the baby could be even a sort of a stuffed doll or just another kid of theirs, whatever, in some smaller sort of suit. But anyways, it's definitely a suit. You can see the goldfish bowl head that's even put right on the top of it. And this is the thing, in fake films, you can always see where the head is actually laying on the shoulders of the sort of things like that. No muscle definitions, none of these sorts of things. So I have to laugh. There's this a funny guy. He has this weird voice. What's his name again? Chillo or something. I've seen one or two of his shows, and he seems to be interested in the same kind of things as I am. But he's like a much younger sort of version and much more chilled back. But a lot of people get, I think, a kick out of his voice and things like this. But I mean, he even many people cover this and make it sound like as if this is a great film. I couldn't disagree more with it. I can completely tell you that almost every film you're looking at is fake. Right across the board. There's less than a handful, well, a little bit more than maybe about six, seven films that I could say would have some kind of validity to them, right? But the Patterson and the one from Russia is the only two worth really sort of where nobody could prove that they're fake because you would have to create things that is was not especially feasible in 67 and these kinds, and the other one you then have to get an actor that can leap 15 to 25 feet every second and be able to run like a quadruped with giant leaps the size of giant lemur monkeys could do, and these kinds of things. It's not feasible that that's a human in a suit, right? So definitely check out my other shows for that sort of thing like that. But the bottom line is that everything backs up with this film. There's all kinds of fake people that have talked all kinds of BS about it, claiming that they have the suit and they made it. None of these people can provide, every single one that ever claimed this, they didn't even know where the location is. Okay, so they couldn't even find the spot. So if you really did that, why weren't you able to sort of go back that? If you really made the suit, why can't you then provide the suit? None of them can. The only guy, one guy out of the about 10 that have claimed this, he had a picture of this fake old gorilla suit. You can clearly see it's not the same. So no matter what, even if the Patterson was a fake suit, it was certainly not the one on the Patterson film. The one he's showing is just an old gorilla suit, completely the same length of hair from the whole thing, a crappy suit. I mean, garbage. I mean, a 4-year-old could tell that it wouldn't be a Bigfoot, right? So, sort of thing like that. So, why anybody listens to any of these people is ridiculous. And the family just wanted to make some cash, I guess, to put this out, and probably got paid for some interviews to say that he's the big genius that fooled the world. But I mean, it's complete BS. All these people, none of them can provide a shred of evidence of whatsoever that they were able to do this. I mean, if I made a film, like I'm a lot older now, right? Let's say I went out there and made the Patterson thing, right? It doesn't matter. I'm still older. I still would know how I made the suit, right? I could give the directions to Junior, and even if my hands were getting a bit more arthritic and wasn't able to do it as well anymore, I could teach anybody to do this in 5 minutes and show them how I did it, and show them how I did the walk, and teach them all this stuff. None of these people can do any of this. They can't even provide below zero, right? So in other words, right? Below zero credibility, any of these people. I mean, below zero. I mean, they actually frustrate me because they're actually completely outright fabricating everything that they're saying. They can't prove a single word of anything that they say, right? Whilst what these guys did, Roger and Bob, like I said, I both interviewed them, and they passed the sort of the test, right? These other guys don't, right? And this would mean again that you got a guy going out chasing sort of a Sasquatch here, and spending all the money that he sort of was making from anything from this film. He kept going back out and chasing it. Who would do that if you sort of then knew it was a fake, right? And if it was a fake, why would you then, if you're that good to fool the greatest experts from Jeff Moldrum, who's an expert at feed and all these kinds of things, to every Dimitri was the best sort of costume designer, pretty well the whole world, sort of world at one point, and all these kinds of different people that have studied this, and all of them say, yeah, sorry, no, it is a real film, right? Like I mean, there's just too many logistics that you couldn't have been a guy in a suit, right? And these sorts of things like that. So, anyways, we'll cover some more key sorts of features here, but everything from the giant lower lips here, you can see sort of, you see how the head is completely built into the shoulders, right? On the other sorts of films like this, you'll never see this. You can actually see this ridge around the sort of whole thing where the goldfish bowl is laying, the helmet, right? And they're all fake. Like I mean, and another great way to tell if the film's fake or not is the length of her arms. In the Patterson film, she's actually about 30% some plus longer than any typical sort of human beings, unless the person was a freak. And so then in order, then you'd have to get an actor who would be extremely rare in the sort of this proportions, right? Okay. Then you have to have an actor that has giant muscles all over this sort of place like this, but perfect muscles like 40 Hulk Hogan's put together, but then also that they apparently don't have any muscles in their chest and they have just natural flabby boobs, right? So if it was a guy in a suit, this would mean that the guy, they would have had to glue hair to his body. It would mean that he's the greatest muscular human being on earth. You can see even the lines and definitions in a lot of her body hair. Just look at even her arms and the stuff. You can actually see the bumps, and we'll be showing this in a minute and these sorts of things, right? Also, the eye coverage. Roger Patterson, as he's running, he's quite a distance away. This creature, if it was a person in a suit, was titanic. So now you have to have this 7 foot plus at least sort of monster lady here or guy, right? The eyeballs of this is incredible, the size. So from that distance, it's covering the whole sort of, you can see the titanic size of her eyes. Her nose is completely, I mean, you're talking like the bangs, there's multi layers of different hair lengths and different things like this. You can actually see on her breasts here there's nipples. So that's a hell of a lot of stuff for a guy to create in 1967, when just not that long before these people that appeared in the paper, they found these tracks. This means within 50 minutes here sort of idea that somehow he was able to create a genius film that has fooled every sort of great expert out there for massive now since 67, everybody looking at it, right? Sort of thing like that. So I mean, these things are not sort of probable, right? So anyways, I'll show you next year the sort of Patterson film, and I'm going to put it in a different sort of way so that you can see some of her movements and some other things that you typically don't notice when you're watching this show. So, folks, here, as you can see, here, I've turned the video around, and you can see a lot of things on here that you don't see when she's looking the other way typically. Look at above her breasts. You never see anybody mention this, but if you look at it this way, you actually will see that the muscles are actually moving above her breasts. This is in 1967, right? Do you see the muscle going in and out of there? You don't see this in other sorts of films, right? Absolutely fascinating sort of thing. And the interesting things about it as well is that you can see on this side too that her arms way better, the different muscular sorts of things in there. Her head fits completely right in. There is no neck here, right? On all the other sorts of films with fake ones, you can easily see the helmet like thing is actually laying on the top. You don't find this in these. All the other ones, the suits are there is no muscles like this. You can clearly see the muscles are moving in and out. The femur muscle. You can even see the gluteus maximus muscles and all kinds of other sorts of muscles here going in and out. This means in '67 that Roger was this sort of a genius that he already found all these sorts of things like this. It's just not feasible whatsoever. And I mean below zero. Right? So I mean these are the things as you have somebody, if they were in a suit, they would have had to been padded with giant, massive, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of more pounds of weight to be able to sink that sort of depth in the ground. They would have had to do all kinds of sort of other things here to get this, and they would have had to glue the sort of fur right to their skin, sort of. So this person would have had to have been a giant. They would have had to geniusly make all kinds of different hair lengths and all kinds of things like this. And they would have had to have super muscles like Hulk Hogan and these kinds of things. You don't see this in other films, right? And this is the sort of thing. So I mean, if you add it all up, you got a person who rented a camera that was after a Bigfoot that they didn't have anything to do with. It was people that had already found these tracks. They were just looking around for this. This means the guy would have to invent this suit quite quickly. And for somebody to be able to, like I said, I've looked at this thousands of times and every sorts of things from every sort of people that was on the scene at the time, from Rennie DeHinden to John Green to all the different ones that investigated this, and everybody came to the same sorts of things here. They're just, it's not feasible, right? Like now one thing though is because I was a good friends with Mr. Din, I used to talk to him constantly, and I was going to go and do some hunting with him and things like that. He tried to discourage me, and he did say these something really weird in one of the conversations because I kept going on about so much. The Patterson is main reason I believe in Sasquatch is because of this film, and he said, "No, no, 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 no." He said, you can't." He said, "There's something about this film that you don't know, like this." And I said, "What? Like? I mean, what did he mean by that, right? Like, I mean, so then all this time it's drove me nuts. I even look again, am I missing something, right? But still the same thing. And over the years, I sort of kept thinking about all the conversations that I had with him, and it seems to me what he really meant was is that back then there was no the big scientific things like you have now where people were able to analyze the original film, sort of like where it was never sort of anything was done with it. It's just the original sort of one. And he didn't have these sorts of like the scientific sort of things that was able to analyze it now with better sort of detection like things of software to blow her up and enhance it and all these kinds of things. So even him, he might have been a bit sort of like leery, thinking that this might have been a great hoax of some sort on even him. And I think he just tried to discourage me from sort of like not because it's a lifelong thing hunting this Sasquatch. Once you're addicted, right? Sort of thing like that. So I mean, I don't really know what he meant by that, but I mean, he did sort of say this, right? And there's something about this film you don't know, indicating that there was something weird about it. But there was this one thing that apparently somebody had made a copy of the original film and did something with the hand or something. This was somebody's one statement a long years ago. And it could be that this is what he was talking about, that maybe something that I mean, don't base everything on this sort of film because he might have even been suspect a little bit of some kind of weird thing of it, right? But nowadays, because people were able to look at the original one and see that it wasn't tampered with and all this sort of things, it verifies exactly what Mr. Patterson had said and Mr. Gimlin here, right? So this is the bottom line. I mean, I interviewed them both. The stories never changed here. Everything matches up. You'd have to be a genius and to be able to fool so many sort of great. Like, I mean, Jane Goodall's lived with apes and all this, and even she is a pro of this film, and massive amounts of scientific people have looked at it and agree that the odds of it being a person in a suit is about zero, right? Like, so it's just it's not feasible because if you look at other sorts of films, even today with all the great sort of better video cameras we have and all these things, all of them look like a joke compared to this one, right? Except for that Russian film that I mentioned, and a couple others that have some validity, like the Creek Crosser and a few others. But a vast majority of them, it just goes to prove that Sasquatch is way rarer than what people think. And most people, if you were near this thing, even myself, I mean, yes, I'd be trying to film it, but I certainly wouldn't be running up to it like Paul Freeman was doing, sort of thing like this, because you don't know this thing could turn on you and kill you, right? I mean, considering there's massive thousands of ancient data reports of them capturing you and everything else, no wonder people do shake when they see these things. But like I said, a lot of this is sort of suspect. It could be that a lot of these things, it all depends on the film. You have to analyze each one at a time. But by far, this is the only one that can withstand every kind of scrutiny. It matches up in every single way from the weight of the creature. It's impossible that it was a person in a suit, to many of the muscles in it, to all kinds of things nobody else can duplicate in other suits. Right? So then this means in 67 that Roger, within 5 seconds, was able to fool Bob and everybody else around him, and 5 zillion people that have looked at this, where we're all agreeing that yes, this must be a real sort of Sasquatch, whatever it is, right? So whether she's a wild human, a gigantopithecus, or this actually is a dude that has way bigger boobs than normal, whatever the case, I presume it's a female because there was this William Rowe that did this great sort of a description of a female Bigfoot, and it matches 100% this sort of the description. Everything about them is the same as this film. And this is an independent person in the 1940s that didn't know Roger Patterson. Roger Patterson didn't know them, and yet they have the exact same descriptions with the tiniest minute details about her lips, even, and all kinds of stuff. Plus, all these ancient accounts all matching these sorts of things. And again, you can see the femur muscle moving in and out of here. It's too good. There's gluteus maximus muscles moving in and out, back muscles, every sort of thing. You just don't see this in any of the suits. Right, and this is the bottom line. So no matter what anybody says, I will stand up for this film to the ends of the earth. Yes, Rennie might have been even suspicious of this film at one point and things like, because he didn't have all the scientific things that could fully prove that yes, it wasn't a person in a sort of a suit. But nowadays, a vast majority of people that you know what I mean have really analyzed this film well, all sort of it's not feasible that it was a person in a suit for multi reasons, and that's the bottom line, right? So, and any of the people that ever claimed they were the person in the suit, none of them can provide a shred of evidence. They can't reproduce the suit. They can't reproduce the walk. No human can walk like that. There was some piles of scientists actually that even tried this to even get mimic exactly the Patterson film by actually. Making a robot with their legs to move exactly like the robotic thing. And even after months of people doing it, they still then, once they were not guided by the robot, they couldn't do it now on their own. So there's all kinds of things that just does not add up that it was a person in a suit. for multi reasons. Even the span is like what the person would have had to have been Titanic. The span across from one footprint to the next, everything about it. But the main thing that convinces me, even besides this suit quality, if it was a suit, right, is just the non feasibility that a person could walk around, even if they were 300 or 400 pound monster lady, she'd still have to have another 400 or 500 pounds bare minimum here to be able to sink remotely into this sort of depth of what was occurring. And this means that a human being at this sort of big range has no problem that can walk just easily like nothing and walk across like no problem, without even any strain with 500 pounds on their back. It's not happening. I mean, it's not feasible. So that this is the bottom line, that no matter what, to get that sort of depth, when you can only get a tenth of an inch in the ground with a couple hundred pounds sort of human being, and when you can only get a half the depth, like just a little over a sort of an inch here into the ground with horses that have way lesser width of feet, and you got a horse and a human being sitting on it, and you still can't even barely get half the sort of depth, that indicates that the actor, because the feet were way bigger and wider, it takes way more weight to do it. They would have even had to have more weight. So now that person's got to weigh twice the amount then of a person with a horse, with them sitting on a horse, right? And this sort of thing, and be able to move fluidly across the screen. It's not happening. Right? And again, you don't see any of the helmet like you do on all the other sort of 98.9% of Bigfoot films and all these sorts of things, right? So, I mean, that's the bottom line stuff. But anyways, we'll continue on with some other sorts of things. But for sure, as far as I'm concerned, the Patterson film is legitimate, no matter what. And, sort of thing like that. What Rennie really sort of, that's mysterious to me a little bit. But like I said, again, I think he just wasn't able to cooperate in his mind 100% that it wasn't a genius fake at the time. But now, with better sort of scrutinized software and all kinds of things, it even corroborates more what Mr. Patterson and Gimlin said, right? Anyways, we'll continue on with some more of it. And so, besides all that, there was some other things like her arm length is actually about near around 30%, 20 some 30% in this sort of range, longer than a typical human. So now you have to have an actor that has longer arms than sort of normal. You can actually see her close up that the this lady here has nipples. I mean, see, this is 1967. Who's gonna go through all this? They claim the guy had $1 million backers and stuff. If you had $1 million backers, obviously you would have been provided a camera. You wouldn't have had to rent it, and you certainly wouldn't have been being charged for late fees and sort of threatened because he actually had owed money on that, you know what I mean, from the rental of this, right? So I mean, none of these things add up for this $1 million backer theory and these sorts of things like that. Again, the eye socket, look at the coverage of that, and everything about her is just, there's too much things, right? Like all the rest of them sadly fail in comparison to that. Now, even though Rennie Hidden tried to discourage me and say there's something you don't know about the film, I suspect that he knew that there was, after the original sort of one, for TV, that somebody did some little thing to it in apparently one of the versions or something that was made after that. And this is what he might have meant, that there's something about the film you don't know, that somebody, you know what I mean? And because I kept asking him, did somebody tamper with it and all these kinds of things, and he wouldn't answer, right? So I mean, it's still a mystery, right? Really, really, what he meant. But I highly suspect that that was what he really meant. So to me, it doesn't detract from the film. Again, when I talked to him quite often, he was even suspicious of the film in some ways himself, right? Because just they didn't have the as good of the scientific things, that the analysis, and they were looking at sort of copies now of the film. Now the originals out there, all the sorts of things. A lot of the questions that he had have now been answered, right? But at that time they weren't, and this sort of thing like that. So that's what I suspect, right? But I mean, everything about it adds up in every single way, shape, or form, right? It's too much, because nobody else can duplicate this today. The only other films, like I said, that are even worth remotely looking at, the Paul Freeman one, even though he was accused of making some kind of doing this and that, his still that film is more likely on the fence of reality that that was a Sasquatch, because like the Patterson film and things, you can actually see a lot more muscular definition there. If that was a person in the suit, I mean, they must add some wild sort of padding in there and some wild sort of things. So, the Paul Freeman one sort of it's not as definitive remotely as the Patterson one, but I would say that it's more likely and the probability real, even though he might have been accused of the odd little thing that he did. Some people, like let's say you had a film of I don't know, a 30-foot great white shark, and you know for sure that it really was one and it went by you. But now, to make double the amount of money, you could add a swimmer in front of it to now look and make it terrifying, the giant sharks coming after you. It may not really mean that, you know what I mean, that that doesn't sort of like the parts of the film that, if you're looking at it just like for him to fake it, you have to look at it on how he could do it and these kinds of things. And it doesn't seem likely, right? So yes, he may have done something, I have no idea, of extra stuff or whatever. But the basic sort of film that he had there, where you see two of them, it's higher probability that it's real than not. Okay, but it's certainly not the Patterson film. But the two for sure that I can tell you 100% cannot be a person in a suit is the Patterson film and the one from Russia. All the others are, yeah, even the Creek Crosser is quite good, but I mean, it's still feasible. Somebody could have had some kind of wild trick there, but it's quite good too. There is some other ones out there that are pretty sort of convincing, and I think I'll put them all together, my the best ones I've ever seen. But these silly ones that people keep going on about, like the female Bigfoot with her baby walking, that is the most fakest thing I've ever seen. Within 3 seconds, how anybody believes that that's real, I don't find it convincing at all. But all these critics keep saying it's convincing. It's not convincing. No muscular definition whatsoever. Looks like a normal sort of stupid suit. And you can even see the goldfish bowl head that she put on, whoever the actor is. You can see the rim right around where the helmet is. Right? I mean, it's a joke. I mean, it's not remotely real. So, anyways, but the Patterson film stands the test of time. You got two people sort of passing lie detector tests. All the people investigated corroborate the sorts of things about it, and all in all, it holds up. Right, whereas with other films, just can't hold up the same sort of like that. So that's the bottom line. So no matter what, there for sure, at least in '67, there was at least one of these Gigantopithecus sort of ladies out there, or some gent with a real breast problem, right? Sort of thing. Whatever the case, that was a living sort of human to ape that was walking across that screen, and it was not a person in a suit. That's all I can sort of tell you, right? So, but anyway, so we'll go on next year to some more wild peeps. The Ohio Grassman, True Close favorite cryptid. He says, "I love the grassman, lula loo." so, so Justin's a big fan of the grass man there. That's the rumors he's going to retire and sort of just hang out with the grass man down in Ohio. Once they throw him out of power or tar and feather him and chuck him out of town, or he might have to hang out in the caves like the grass man and this sort of thing. Now, the Ohio grass man has been reported for hundreds of years. I could have showed you some older reports and things like that, but I mean, I covered these in some of my other shows, lots of old newspaper reports. So, but what's different about the Grassman a little bit is he seems to be a bit more gorilla-ish, a little bit lesser in height than average. Like most of them seem to be in the more 6 foot, sort of 6, 7, 8 foot sort of range. Whilst with the California monsters, sometimes are at least like 8 feet to like it's different, right? Like there's in certain areas they seem to be a bit shorter or a bit taller, depending on the location and the broad and the width and stuff. This grass man is quite often seen eating grass and things like that, and he's quite often has color of hair that's similar that blends in well, which could be a natural sort of thing that they sort of like that. So, but I mean, there's black ones too, and all kinds of other colors. But some quite often they can be sort of like a grassy color. So that interesting. Early accounts there was one that used to terrorize. Around Cleveland, Ohio, in this sort of a cave. And the many people seen this thing, and it would come out and sort of it would run on all fours. They said quite often. So this is another thing that quite often this grass man seems to be a bit more sort of like apish for sure, like gorilla-ish, like and sort of things like that. Here, the Ohio Grassman. Here's an early sort of a film from quite a long time ago. It was an older one there, but he's it's an interesting one here because it's an older clip, so it's before the CGI stuff and these sorts of things like that. And he is quite wide. I don't really even know what that thing is that he's hiding behind there, but I mean, whatever the case, there he's poking out at it. And if you look here, it looks like good sort of it's big, right? So if it was a person in a suit, they were sort of pretty padded up there, sort of thing like that. But it's certainly not remotely convincing like the Patterson film or any of them. But this one I find interesting. The only problem that I do have with it that is a bit weird is even though the head seems to fit on there, I can still see this roundness on the head there, like as if somebody put like a goldfish bowl on the top of their head. So I'm a bit leery of it, sort of in that sort of way, like that. But it could be that it gets too blurry and too far off to sort of make a conclusive sort of case for it, one or another. But at least Ohio Grassman's been seen for hundreds of years. He's fairly consistent, and even in here, you can see his sort of skin is matching sort of the background in this sort of thing, like that, his hair and this. So it could be that yeah, just natural adaptation that they would like a lot of creatures. Quite often, their hair will start blending in with sort of the environments that they're living in and that sort of thing, like that. So he's certainly interesting, anyways. And that here's from 1980s Bigfoot sighting scares the socks off Logan County officials investigating. Right, Bellefontaine, sort of Logan County, sort of this Bigfoot stalking the wooded hills between West Mansfield and the Union County line. Right, and that sort of thing like that. So this guy was unloading 8 pigs, and he brought out about 11 p.m. He had shut off the light in the barn, and when he around the corner to see why his dogs were sort of going on and this sort of thing like this, all of a sudden this Bigfoot guy just stepped out, right? So probably he was looking to get at the pigs and that sort of thing like that. A lot of times they are reported to be doing these kinds of things like that. So it's interesting, sort of a cryptid there for sure. Here's like I have problems when you get photographs this close. I find them quite suspect. Even though it's blurry and everything like that, Jonky says that that's actually true glow in disguise, just looking for wild pot plants. So, it could be. But especially the main area that he's seen a lot is the Sulphur Fork State Park, sort of along this Appalachians, right? And all the other states right beside it all also have these sort of sightings and things like that. But when they're this close, I am a bit suspect. I mean, if I wouldn't want to stand that close to one, I mean, I even myself, I would be leery that possibly I might upset the creature and he might turn on you and attack you, man. Like, you don't know this, right? Like, yeah, everybody loves to think of them as the Harry the Hendersons, but yeah, yeah, you know, I mean, like the natives say, right? Some of them can be cannibalistic or vicious or all kinds of things, right? So I'm suspect when somebody walks right up to it like that sort of thing, like that, and still yet they're managing not to get a very clear sort of a photo, right? So I can't tell you whether this one's real or not, but I can tell you this one is fake for sure. Completely. You can see it's a very typical sort of gorilla suit, and I can actually you see where the guy's pointing the red arrow here down at the head, where they were pointing this just to show that it was a Bigfoot in the Sulphur Fork State Park. However, I'm pointing it out to you because you can clearly actually see the defined line where the helmet's on. So it's just like the head is laid right on there. You can actually see the line going across, right? It's garbage. There's no muscle definition whatsoever. And I would say in the highest probability, 98 point some percent, that is fake. You know, either that or the Bigfoot was super massively furry, sort of thing like that. And there is some that seem to be like this where they might be real, the actual film, but they you don't see their muscle definition as well because of the just gigantic carpet of fur that they have. Some of them are just like humans, right? Like, I mean, one might be a bit more furry than the next, right? But in this case, I would say in the highest probability that that's an actual fake sort of a person in a suit, a sort of thing like that. But next, we'll go on about the Florida wild man. Now, this one I believe in a lot more sort of thing like that. I actually found prints. I kept looking for prints all over through Florida and things, but I actually found when I did actually find these tracks, I was actually hunting for fishing sort of thing at this point, and it was along the St. John's River, and I found these tracks. But sadly, it rained just before that, and sort of some of the toes had blended together, so sometimes it looked like the creature only had four toes instead of five. I saw no nails whatsoever and things like that, and they were extremely deep in the ground, and they seemed to be about 5 point some feet to about 6 feet on average walking across. So I had to sort of leap to make it to the next sort of thing, and I could barely get in the ground, even though the ground was moist and everything from the rain. I still couldn't remotely get jumping up in the air and sort of landing, couldn't get remotely like, and you could clearly tell the toes were different in each sort of one as I was following along. I went through this crash through this woods to check out the St. John's River. I wanted to see what along this area, and all of a sudden there was these tracks there. They were, and so the creature had meandered along. It seemed like he was drinking water or she, whatever, and then they went back into the bush. And I certainly wasn't going back in the spot that they were in. I mean, I didn't know how, but I wouldn't know how to tell whether how fresh that they might have been. But yeah, you know what I mean. I don't imagine they were super old, right? And this sort of things like that. And in fact, a couple of them were really weird. They almost looked like a three-toed one, where a couple of them is sort of because of all the rain, it pounded and blended the sort of toes together a few, right? So you'd look like one big toe and then two smaller toes, but really it was in some you could see the whole five sort of toes, but just barely, like sort of thing like that. But none of them had any claws. There was no imprint in the middle. They were gigantic. You know, at least like I think from what I can recall, there's something they were about 17, 18 inches, something like that, sort of thing, right? And but they were at least about like 7 inches across wide, and sort of thing like that. And I'd used like my fishing rod. I mark it every sort of foot and things like that for fish, for big muskies and things like that. So I typically do this, and this is how I didn't have like measurement stick with me, but I measured it that way, and that's what it ended up being after checking on it and that sort of thing. But this is very similar to what I found. They looked exactly like this, pretty well exactly the same. Sort of that sort of width up at the front. I sort of tapered a little bit, but certainly way wider than any human being and this sort of things. And there certainly is a giant grizzly bears running around in the sort of Florida swamps, and right. So there was no claw marks in the middle or any of these sorts of things that you would look for that a bear would have. And I've seen bear tracks many, many times and this sorts of things like that. When I was in BC, we even saw them, and right away I knew it was a bear track instead of a Bigfoot, right? So yeah, yeah, they're quite actually bear tracks are quite different, the claws and all this sort of thing like this, but this what they look like. But the thing is that in the older days, like some of the best accounts that you could possibly sort of have is sort of uh, is that in the older sort of accounts, okay, like there was these giants, and there was this fantastic account of this 13-foot one that was killed by these sort of a bunch of sort of these trackers and these sort of posse. And they all blasted this one particular Bigfoot with tons of muskets, and they were able to finally kill him after he had killed some of their clan and things like this. In the description, this is decades before the gorilla was ever discovered, yet this guy describes it with copper nails, which many native tribes, their word for a Sasquatch, if you turn it into our language, it means copper nails. Okay, so this guy in 1830 something is able to sort of already know. He describes a 13-foot giant that they killed. His arms was past way past his knees. Okay, so way bit longer than any human being typically could ever sort of have, right? Okay, that's another thing. His feet was 21 inches long. Okay, and completely thick, covered with fur. He had this great big pointed cranium on him. Everything in the universe sort of is beyond sort of it exactly matches a giant Sasquatch of sort of like the ones that were found in the Lovelock Cave or these other sorts of ones like this, these giant big red-haired sort of brownish whatever haired sort of giants here, and gigantic footprints, gigantic everything. But this sort of type, this giant one, the natives said was uncommon even then, but they seem to have pretty well vanished off the sort of things. Almost all the reports in modern times are more sort of the average, like a bit more orangutanish, big, like that sort of way. They're not these super mega giants that used to be around in this Florida market. They may be being still seen, but almost all the reports that I see are more typically like a skunk ape, where he's smaller, anywhere from 4 to sort of 8 feet sort of tall is typical, so shorter, and they're a bit shorter, their feet, and a bit sort of not as big as a typical BC monster or some of the ones, right? And this sort of thing like this. But I mean, it was amazing to me because there's no way, there was nobody knew that I was going to go in this spot, so it couldn't have been one of the people I was with that did this for a joke on me. I found these by just pure accident because I was looking for sort of I wanted to check out the St. John's River fishing and the monster and this sort of thing, and I actually got lucky and actually saw some really bizarre sort of thing in the St. John's River that went by this huge sailboat that was bigger than the sailboat, and it had the body exactly of a whale shark or a basking shark, and exactly where I was, the ocean apparently goes through these canal channels and then gets into the St. John's. So, like, I never was on the other side exactly where these canals are. So, I was never on that side, but I was across from the other side of it. And this is where I saw this thing coming along. And whatever it was some not, it was certainly not a school of fish. It could not have been a sturgeon, it was way too wide. It could not have been any, so it was either a whale or basking shark or some kind of sea monster. So whatever it was, I saw something really strange there, but I also found these footprints, right? And this sort of thing like that. So I got lucky in Florida a bit of times, and a few other areas I've searched and things like that. So it very convinced me. I mean, the sort of the bear, like from what I recall, they were about 16, 17 inches long, somewhere in that sort of thing like that. Like I have it really well written down somewhere, but this is just from sort of memory, from what I can sort of remember. But the main thing that I mostly remember most of all, that the width of it was about 7 inches. I remember that a little bit better. But the thing that I remembered most about them at all was simply just the great depth that was making, and the stride length was extremely impressive. I mean, somebody to do this, and why would you do this? You only walk, like you seem to have come from a bush, you walked a little bit, seemed to maybe add some water there, because a couple of the prints seemed to be facing out of the water. Then it turned and it went back into the bush. So, I mean, simply the great ape went and got some water and then he went back out, right? So, I mean, I really became even more convinced of Sasquatch's reality after sort of seeing this, because, I mean, hey, this was in 70, or that's sort of like a long, long time ago, and just a younger fellow, but I mean, this what I saw, and I took photographs of it. I'm still trying to find those and these sorts of things like that. There's 10 zillion photographs that have been sort of misplaced and all kinds of things, but eventually I'll find them and be able to get them up here. This print here that you're seeing here, some ones of more recent times being found, it looked extremely like what I saw, extremely so, right, and that sort of thing like that. But this area I find extremely convincing. This granny said that this Bigfoot like sort of skunk ape was going out and stealing her apples and things. You can actually see its teeth in there and everything. The eyes are not that of a human's here. The iris there and everything looks very different to me. And it could, there is great apes that look like this orangutanish sort of thing sometimes that are weird. And I highly suspect that besides maybe possibly an unknown great ape that lives in the Florida swamp, it could be that early introduced ones from the 1800s from trade and things. These orangutans, or even unknown species of apes that might have been more common that were trapped ages ago and brought over, might have gotten released in the Florida market and continued on this sort of Bigfoot like phenomena. And they might have adapted and already changing a little bit to the environment around there. Maybe they need the thick fur. You'd think they'd be dying of heat and all that sort of thing, but maybe the fur is somehow allows them to sort of the heat to come out and sort of thing like that. And but maybe it's to for insects sort of to help prevent like less bites and all that. So I have no idea. Like, but there could be many sort of weird reasons why they would be extra furry like that. But I would say that's one of the most convincing photographs I've ever seen of sort of like of ones that I would suspect in the highest probability is not a person in a suit. That looks pretty good compared to just about any of the ones I've ever seen. And this is what I ran across. So you can see here some of them look like the sport toad sort of thing like that. Some of the prints look like that, but mine were because it had rained, and sometimes the two became one. And so you'd notice one was a bit fatter. These four equal all sort of, so this would be just like a four-toed one, and quite often even humans have this. So this is not non-feasible at all, and that sort of thing like that. But it's extremely interesting, and I mean, this Florida wild man certainly has hundreds of years historic sort of records to it. Plenty of sightings, but like I said, it seems to be more of a different, of a definitely not wild humans here like in many of them. It's more sort of like some kind of wild orangutan great ape of some sort, and a vast majority of cases, except these early giants that may be extinct now, because like I said, none of the modern reports match remotely these old Florida reports from the 1800s and things like that. I don't see any of these monster 10, 12 foot good goons anymore like in those days, right? This was filmed by some kind of a couple there, I believe was. They were out on some kind of their kayaks or canoe or something. And this Bigfoot, it's actually was way out there in this swamp. I mean, this is out in the middle of nowhere. So they that would mean that either they're completely outright lying and set this all up, which I doubt. Okay, so that means that lunatics are way out in the middle of the swamp in the hopes that some people will come back in their kayak and see them and without shooting at them or all this kinds of stuff is pretty hard to believe, right? So I mean, this is a gator infested, deadly python infested, snake infested hole with all kinds of crazy other creatures floating around in there. And you can actually see on the film this Bigfoot actually trying to dig and grabbing at stuff. So I don't know if it was fishing or trying to grab at snakes or frogs or whatever it was doing. And you actually see muscles in the arms and things that looks very natural to me. It doesn't look like a person in a suit. So I would give this one a more higher credibility, even though sadly you can't see much of it. It has more credibility to it of the other weird things about it that it's more likely real than not. Than a fake, right? And that sort of thing like that. So I check that one out there. It is interesting. However, this one is fake. This one I find a joke. There is no muscle definition there whatsoever. Okay, the person's arms are way too short. Sort of like this. This does not look to me like remotely authentic. It looks like a typical bargain basement suit. The person looks like they're exaggerated walking. It's not natural whatsoever, and it's very easy. If you notice where they got this, there was a bunch of tourists going by, and all of a sudden they saw this Bigfoot going through the grass. Simply, the guy parked his car over there. He ducked down in the grass and waited for some people to come by, and then just popped his head up, and now starts making this exaggerated walk, scoots across and disappears into trees over there, and then everybody's convinced you got Bigfoot. But to me, this is a very junky film and not remotely, in the highest probability, not real. So that So anyways, I below zero would give this any authenticity whatsoever. It's not even worth even discussing. So anyways, a lot of people put it on the shows and stuff, but to me, it's a completely very sort of suit like, big time. Now, here the wild peeps of Vietnam, the Laos wild man, and that from the Vietnam wild man first came to U.S. readers' attention when guys would come back from the Vietnam War, including one of my relatives that told me this wild story of seeing four of them. These men, often in deep jungles, reported hairy ape people from 4 to 8 feet tall or more, different than our Bigfoot a bit. They seemingly a bit more humanish like and quite often they'll beat their chests like a gorilla. They love shooting rocks at you. They also stink, but they're a bit more sort of violent in this sort of thing. They'll throw rocks at you or different sorts of things like this, and will charge at you a little bit more than a lot of our typical sort of ones, right? But and they're not as wide typically as a giant Bigfoot that we have. They're more sort of like a great big muscular human, sort of like that, and their head's a bit more rounded, not with the pointy sort of coned head as much like that. Main sorts of areas is like this Kebang forest and this sort of thing like that, but it's a very interesting sort of a cryptid. Many stories of came back, but one of the sort of my relatives there in '66, they were going down this sort of road on a Norton, and actually some person that we're with, and this even happened to my old man, where he was going along, and the person he was with actually got blown up in the road and this sort of thing like this. So this person had quite the wild morning, and they were going along, and they went down this sort of big long sort of thing, and there was giant trees on both sides, and it was a bit dark in there and sort of a funny time of day. And as they were going along on this sort of Norton like this, all of a sudden these four sort of upright, sort of gorilla-like sort of creatures sort of went right out in the road right in front, and then all of a sudden they noticed him and the sound, and then they sort of scooted and went quite fast and bolted. But he figured out from like the height, from what he could tell of being on his Norton and stuff like this, that the two parents must have been around 7 feet tall, at least somewhere in that sort of range, and these there was two smaller ones that seemed to be about 5 feet tall that might have been their children or something like that, right? But he thought that they were dark blackish in color. But even though a lot of them are described reddish and things like that, it could be that it might have been just that time of day, because it's in between this forest and the light isn't up full blast sunlight yet and all that sort of thing. it could be that that was the reason that it made it look like that, right? That maybe they actually were, brownish or something else. It's hard to know, but just a fascinating sort of a thing like that. But multi witnesses from different all kinds of ones over the ages have had these stories of running across these rock people and little battles with them when they were out there in Vietnam and Laos, Malaysia too, and any of the areas around there, pretty well, most of these areas have these sort of sightings, right? So it's very interesting. It's super old, right? So it's just as old as any of the sort of Bigfoot like phenomena sort of going on around here and that sort of thing like that. And these people were seeing them then, and they're still continue seeing them now, right? Sort of thing like that. So I know my relatives saw something there. Whatever they were, they did look like hairy, upright human beings, right? And I know this. So they didn't make this up. So anyway, so whatever the case, I'm convinced that yeah, I mean, there definitely is something to this sort of this great Batu forest man, right? Sort of thing like this. Here's a more recent photo there. You can actually see in the background this Bigfoot running up sort of the hill while these two guys were sort of smiling and posing here, right? And the Bigfoot's bolting, looking for something, maybe, sort of thing like this. But one of the main stories was this sort of these helicopter pilot ground troops of the '60s. Sort of this one guy had mentioned about that these army men had actually captured one of these sort of guys in nets somehow, and then I guess killed it of some sort, right? A sort of thing like that. Now, this is really interesting and bizarre. Exactly when this story started spreading around and things like this, now here comes this guy along the scene. This guy here, okay, what had happened was is that he was in Nam around the same time. He leaves, okay, right? And here he comes back, and all of a sudden he's got this Minnesota Iceman that he claimed he shot in Minnesota, okay? And he had it frozen in ice. And these rumors at the same time was out there that somebody over in Vietnam had killed one of these men and that they had smuggled it across. Now this might be this guy because back it's the army, right? So if this guy had knew a colonel buddy or any of these kinds of things, you could sort of do this and get away with this because nobody questions the army. It's a different sort of a thing, right? But these rumors, and there was even a paper trail that sort of back to this sort of guy a little bit that verifies sort of the story a little bit. Now, here's some other interesting things about it. Okay, is that this Frank Anson is this now he started showing this sort of Iceman, right? It was frozen in Paris. Okay. Now here's the problem. Ivan Sanderson went and checked this. All kinds of different ones, and early people took photographs of it. And these sort of thing, Bernard Hoovelmans also checked it out. And these guys were convinced that he was a real sort of anthropoid sort of ancient human or whatever that was frozen in this sort of thing. So the police started investigating around. So many people were convinced by it that the police started coming and saying, hey, you know what I mean? You're going to have to sort of yeah, is that really a person in there? And so, of course, he denied and that sort of thing like that. And he was worried that they were going to come back and sort of do something, right? All of a sudden, the Minnesota Iceman disappears, and now all of a sudden, now this one shows up. Now there's no ice. They're laying around. The police came back and investigated another time, and of course now it's a rubber sort of guy, right? And this is the sort of thing. So what's believed is that somehow Mr. Frank here he got paranoid because the police were sort of and then he was because he smuggled this wild man across and he could be considered an actual real human being. He thought he might get in sort of some kind of trouble like this. So it's just convenient that it's like if it was a fake rubber guy in a suit, why would you then go through all the trouble to bring him over and keep him frozen and then sort of then have this sort of frozen thing like this when 2 minutes later now you're showing them for ages this way. Why would you do that if it was a rubber monster in the first place, right? But if the police sort of, if this is true, that sort of he got paranoid and was worried that he was going to get caught, that he smuggled this human being that maybe he might actually even get charged for or something like this, about actually murdering sort of thing, he got paranoid, got rid of this sort of body, whatever happened to it, and then he had reportedly went and approached this guy and found some person that could do rubber like sort of stuff, and this guy tried to copy as best as he could this sort of this what he was seeing in the ice sort of thing. And then this one started showing up. So when the police came to finally investigate this, of course, it wasn't in ice anymore, and these sorts of things like this, and it was different. So I just have a hard time believing that you could fool Ivan Sanderson, Bernard Hoopelmans, and different ones looking at it and things like that. I also find it hard to believe that some guy's gonna go through all this expense to put a rubber monster and then freeze them, keep them freezing around the clock. For what reason, when 2 minutes later you're showing them like this all the time? What would be the difference? Why did you ever bother doing that in the first place? You would only do this if it was actually true that you really did have a frozen person in there. Now the police have come, now you're paranoid about it, so you get rid of the body, but you still want to make money and show this thing around, so now you find some guy that can make like a costume suit to try and match what you had as close as you could. But sadly, it didn't really match it very well. Here's an original sort of early photos, okay, when he was still in ice. Now look at that face and the nose, the lips, and the eyes on this, okay? That guy, that really does look like a human more. Like it does look like more like a wild human, just a very sort of furry wild human sort of thing like this. Look at this face. It's not remote. It's not the same here. It doesn't look the same. Not at all. And there's actually another picture I could show you where you can clearly see it cannot be the same as the picture of this here. It's the nose is different, the mouth even position is different, and everything about it. The rubber monster is much more rounded and fake like. I believe this was actually real at this point when it was in the frozen sort of thing. And again, this Frank Hansen, he was in Nam at the same time. He had these sort of buddies. He was right in the same sort of area. There's a bit of a paper trail out there where, something was smuggled across back here from different investigators that have investigated this sort of thing, right? So this is a very sort of an interesting one out there. Again, because I talked to Evan Sanderson when I was younger, and this sorts of things, and Mr. Bernard Hubelmans, and that sort of both of them fully were convinced that what they had seen in the frozen ice that they investigated for a long time looking at it, that it was not the same monster as this, right? That what they saw was this dude, right? Not this thing. This is, and I mean, it would perfectly make sense. The guy still wanted to make money. Here it is frozen, right? I mean, who's going to go through all this sort of problem keeping it frozen around the clock and stuff like this? For what possible reason? Why would you do that when you made a fake rubber monster? It never needed to be frozen from day one, and you could have just put it in a glass case, right? Like he did after for showing it around all over the place, right? So this is the thing; these things don't add up, and because there is these sort of stories, and the police was, it would make sense. The guy got panicked, right? And now the police keep looking around, and he's now there. He's worried that they were gonna, you know what I mean, to have some warrant and be able to investigate it further. And then now, if he actually, he could be charged for some kind, because if they deem that to be an actual wild human of some sort, he still would be human, right? And this sort of thing like this. This is another reason I'm against shooting Sasquatch in that sort of way. I understand if one's coming at you, you got no choice, right? Or whatever. It looks like that. But I mean, it could be that some of them again are wild sort of humans, right? And I mean, that's sort of yeah, you know what I mean? Like I think there'd be ways of catching these things if people would start building better traps, putting out areas, leaving camera traps for months and months and months in areas, and have some kind of traps there where the sort of eventually the smell is going to go away from these cameras, these kinds of things. The creature's going to come in, poof, you got him in a net. The thing signals to you. Now all your gang can rush in there and sort of get the guy within so many hours of the location and that sort of thing like that. That's what people should be more sort of trying to do with these sorts of things. But it's interesting anyways, and it's a fascinating sort of story. And because there's hundreds of accounts of these Vietnam sort of soldiers running across these rock apes, it's quite a convincing sort of one like this. And this Frank Anson there, he changed the story the second that these police started coming along. All of a sudden, he shot at Minnesota. Then it was in the woods of this place, and it was this and that. His story kept changing every sort of 3 minutes, right? Because I mean, as you can imagine, again, you'd be scared, right? I could see that. I mean, the same thing. You'd be worried about sort of the trouble of it, right? So even today, still they're seeing these sorts of things here. You can see Malaysian here, some from Vietnam. So very similar to our Sasquatch sort of that we're finding in other places, right? So just there's different ones, right? It all depends on the sort of area and that sort of thing like that. Uh, Next year, we'll go on about the sort of wild peeps here. The Nahani Valley is sort of home of hairy cannibal giants and the little people, along with visitors' heads missing, makes this valley one creepy place. It's located in Canada's Fraser Valley sort of region, right? And it's got wild stories of giant dire wolves, sort of 25-foot sort of killer bears, these weird sort of white giant killer cats that could be sort of Siberian tigers of some sort, cannibal like trolls of the small sort, and the big hairy kinds. Right? So it's quite an interesting sort of a valley, this sort of a place. I was near there, but never went in that far into the interior of this sort of area. But it's extremely remote. The creatures there seem to be Titanic sort of size or the little people, one of the two, right? And there's massive accounts of either little people or giants in this sort of Nahani Valley, right? And these sort of other sort of mysteries mixed in with it, from dire wolves to 25-foot foot long sort of giant polar bear like sort of creatures, right? And these sorts of things like that. So it's an absolutely fascinating sort of other sort of a place here that certainly would be worth sort of investigating. But be careful. Most people that go there, they end up with their head missing, and they find them later, right? So somebody was doing it, right? Not good, right? Sort of thing like this. And these stories have occurred in other places too, of a similar like thing. There were finding these people decapitated later and this sort of stuff like this. So this Nahani Valley there is something wild, but these dire wolves, I mean, if any place they could survive, it could be in areas like this. There's this amazing film from Saskatchewan showing a giant sort of black wolf that would be in the size of a dire wolf size. Sort of thing like that. Nobody's ever been able to identify it. It certainly doesn't look like any of our normal Canis lupus sort of wolves here. And this guy's Titanic. I mean, the guy's dog is near it, and the guy's dog looks like a mouse compared to this thing, right? And this sort of thing. And so he fits perfectly in the size of a dire wolf like sort of size to it, right? And because there's so many stories in this region, so either a few things are happening. Either they have sort of dire wolves there that sort of have survived from this sort of thing like this, or wolves that get twice the size of just about any place on earth, bigger in this sort of region, okay? Or that there's some kind of other weird sort of a species, sort of that are similar to this, that were sort of undiscovered in this sort of thing. But definitely there is a lot of sort of credibility. Hundreds of years of early explorers and everybody mentioning these Titanic wolves, these hairy giants that live in the caves there, and the little guys that live in the caves. There's even early explorers mentioning about finding these islands around there were sort of there was piles of little bodies that they found on there where little people lived on them. They were only like 3 to 4 feet tall, sort of thing, and they found all kinds of piles of skeletons of them. So it's a very interesting, mysterious sort of a place, and sort of like that. I'd be scared though because it's the headless part there sounds like Ichabod Crane's buddies leaping around there, sort of thing like that. So not good. So certainly, if you do go on an investigation out in that sort of area, it's a great place because not only can you find Littlefoot, you can find giant Bigfoot, but you can also find dire wolves, possibly a known giant sort of a cat seer decides, possibly some kind of relic population that could be related to Siberian tigers or Siberian tigers that are way off their regular course, because Alaska isn't that massively far away, and that sort of thing like that. So even that's feasible. But it's certainly an interesting area that's loaded full of hundreds of years of interesting travelers' accounts and stuff that are pretty creepy, some of them and stuff like that. So if you want an investigation, that's certainly a great place because of the amount of different ones that you can run across. Right? There's even in some of this area, some of the waters around there also have lake monster like phenomena and stuff like that as well. That sort of thing. So they're a good spot. Here, the New Zealand's Mohau man, Coromandel man, right? Even James Cook actually mentioned this sort of the earliest explorers when they came, right? The earliest people that settled on it and things like that. These settlers started seeing these large, hairy bushmen, and there was deaths attributed by them and the Maori people that lived there. These natives that also, of course, described this Waitoric, another one that I believe in there, but this Bushman is different. This guy here has a much longer claws. He doesn't seem to be as big as our typical giant sort of Sasquatch, and his arms are extremely long, and he stinks, right? So what I find interesting is here you got accounts from this Captain Cook and all this sort of things, right? And these early Maori people and the early settlers all telling you that they live in a cave, they stink, they got massive long arms, they got long nails, and all this sort of stuff look just like a hairy wild human, right? Okay. The thing is that you have to remember that how is it feasible then that now in North America and other places that people are telling you the exact same thing every time. The guy lives in the caves. The great big longer arms that are much more than a thing, right? And this is like at first, this is actually still even before gorillas were even known yet. They were just about to be discovered, but I mean, this is the thing. You got independent people here on a totally different continent and place here, right? That they're describing the same kind of monster as what somebody would describe in Vietnam or different other places. There's variants. Some have longer claws, some whatever, right? And some are more gigantopithecus, some are a bit more wild human like, and some are much more apish, sort of vicious like these kinds of ones were, right? So this is the sort of thing is that there's variants of these, but it's astonishing how they all are the same in the sort of general sort of sense, right? So that means a lot of people worldwide have certainly elucidated a lot of sort of things like this. And like I show you there, that these can't be hallucinations because they've really found fresh skeletons and things that match all the descriptions of what the people are telling you, which proves their stories to be true. At least that hundreds of years ago there was some kind of giant people or ape man or something was walking around in caves and going ooh 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 not that long ago, right? So no matter what anybody says, like I said, there is proof that Bigfoot like sort of phenomena exists. 100% guaranteed of this because you cannot argue that hundreds of years ago there was the Lovelock Cave and in Ecuador and some other places that have been found where these skeletons are only hundreds of years old. They're 7 to 8 feet tall to 11 feet tall. One example, in this sort of thing like this. They're red haired giants or some other close color. They got giant feet. The natives tell you that they come down and sort of eat them or rape them or do all this sorts of stuff. and yet you find exactly what they tell you, right? So it 100% corroborates their story and proves that hundreds of years ago that some natives must have seen real live some kind of giants that lived around in caves, right? So this is what I'm saying. It's very sort of, no matter how many people want to be skeptical, you already have the sort of bodies are out there that can match these sorts of things that do corroborate their stories. Not every single one. We don't have a Mohau man this minute or different ones, but there's enough evidence out there in a few areas that proves that some of these stories are true. So if some are true, many more must be likely in the same sort of thing like this. Like I said, I just don't believe that people randomly making up the same sort of crazy sort of thing each time, their imagination perfectly. Like, why isn't the Bigfoot 90 feet tall in some areas? And why doesn't he have three arms or two bums or whatever, right? It's always the same variants. Maybe the claws are a bit, or the arms are a bit longer or whatever, but that would be just natural in the environment that they live in. Just like humans, in some areas are shorter, some they're taller, right? Like you got pygmy tribes, all kinds of stuff. So there's going to be variants, but they may be all similar, sort of related here of some sort, right? So anyways, next time there, hopefully we'll get this Muskrat Lake Monster film. I'm still trying to find somebody with a VCR so we can tape this. We'll cover some more giant snakes in the lakes. Little Bigfoot and some other odds and ends. And if you have any sightings there, please contact Cryptozoology Sightings at protonmail.com. And certainly appreciate your story there, or if you have any some kind of particular creature you'd like to see highlighted one time, certainly could do that for you and that sort of thing like that. So this one was a bit more serious the last time. There was one of the people that watches Mr. Viking there. I tried to respond to this person numerous times, and for some reason the Google thing wouldn't allow me to do it. So I took your sort of advice there. I got we redid this for you. Okay, you might have even left. I haven't seen it a bit or whatever. I tried to respond back to you, but I did listen to things that you said, and we sort of read this. And I told John Gee to calm down with some of his comedy here for 5 minutes, and sort of thing like this. I kept this one this time a bit more serious. I actually covered, I think, better though some parts of the Patterson film in my history with it better the last time. But anyways, this is it gives you an idea out there that certainly this Patterson film has validity. There's some things like that, and yeah, with some of these other films, I might fix up to that we joked around with a bit and that sort of thing like this, and yeah, and again, no disrespect to any sort of group there when we make fun of the the Beast of Sep shoots and things like that. It's just simply if you've been in Montreal, Quebec City, and stuff like that, sometimes they have a lot of flamboyant bars there with people where they do come out in giant wild mink coats and wild purses and all kinds of funny things that you'll see that is sort of like that. So it has nothing to do with their orientation or these kinds of things. It's just it reminded Jean-Guy and this sort of thing of these sorts of things that we've seen. Even myself, I've seen some characters that didn't look much different from the Beast of Septras. So that was the comedy of it, not to make fun of any particular sort of group out there and these sort of things like that. So, but anyways, hopefully we cleared this up, the sounds better and that sort of thing like that. And we'll cover some more interesting topics and these kinds of things and hopefully sort of you enjoyed this, even though it was a bit shorter this time. And I just we just wanted to redo it again there just because this viewer, he said he couldn't hear it that well and sort of thing like this, and too much laughing in it and things like that sort of stuff. So this but I mean we do like to have a little bit of fun with the odd stories where they sound funny. Yeah, then we might have some comedy about them. So even if we're joking, saying it's yeah, you know what I mean, a hairy this guy or whatever, it's nothing to do with their race or these kinds of things. It's just we have actually seen in real life people that could almost be some of these sorts of things with flamboyant outfits on and stuff. So it was just another guess, like another sort of funny thing to give it a bit of comedy to it. Nothing against any personal groups. I mean, in today's times, people are a lot more sensitive. When we come from different eras, way back in the day when I was a kid, yeah, yeah, in the same class, the black guy would be teasing a Puerto Rican guy, the Puerto Rican guy would be teasing a Chinese guy, the Chinese guy would be teasing a white guy. Like we all sort of, the French guy and the English would bug each other constantly and all that sort of stuff. Like we took it like more fun, right? But in today's time, as you seen the other night there with the Mr. Smith, there wasn't too amused with Mr. Rock there, right? But I mean, yeah, sometimes some of these jokes can be really personal to some people, and I feel sorry for his wife there with this sort of issue. I understand about that sort of thing like that. Like I said, I'm interested in sort of herbalism and things like that. There's other things out there. A lot of people have had success in the past. With plants like stinging nettle that helps sort of hair growth quite good, and even though some people would claim it's anecdotal, and same with horseshoe woo root to keep your hair sort of not turning gray. I've seen myself personally, like I said, I can't give you doctor advice or whatever, these sorts of things like that. But the thing is from my own personal experiences, these are the things that I've seen that people taking these sorts of things, it has to actually help with their hair growth and these sorts of things like that. So there is other alternatives out there and sort of things like this. And I mean, especially for a lady, that would be a hard thing like this. And I mean, so, sometimes people lose their sort of cool, right? And I mean, he shouldn't have done it. I know he knows he shouldn't have done it or whatever, but I don't think he's like, I mean, you know what I mean? He went up, he did his thing, and yeah, yeah, I mean, but I hate to see though the Chris Rock guy, like it actually, in a way, sort of, it's kind of sad here. Like now, Will Smith is sort of because he got over it's a sensitive subject because his wife now is yeah, yeah, had this issue and stuff like that, so it got to him a bit more like than typically might have, right, on another day. And the Chris Rock guy, I doubt even knew that she had this issue, but I mean these sorts of things, right? So it's another sort of thing out there, but I in one sense I kind of commend him for sort of sticking up for his sort of, but at the same time, sometimes you just got to hold yourself, right? I mean, there's all kinds of characters over the years I've probably wanted to clunk or something, right? But I mean, you just got to sort of, no matter what, right? But I mean, certainly if your lady's being sort of attacked, that you got to defend, right? And sort of thing like that too, right? So there's these things, right? Like I mean, so but I mean, I hope it doesn't go too much against them or anything like that, because Chris Rock then will be the only guy that's actually benefited from this. His sales of his tickets have increased. That they said he sold more tickets in the last few days than he has in months. And now his prices are like a near about $1,000 for a ticket just to see him, all because Will Smith punched him. So Will Smith actually increased his career, helped him tremendously, and this. So even though he did sort of probably wrong behavior, not the place to do this, he probably should have waited till after the party in some sort of quiet area went by and whatever, right? But sort of thing like that. But and then it wouldn't have been such a big on the news, right? But anyways, these sort of things, right? And I mean, so we all, people can lose their cool and that sort of thing like that. So like, that's so it's no matter what. We all sort of, these things can happen, right? So, anyways, so hopefully that turns out well for those sort of people and that sort of thing like that. But I don't think he should have went up and clocked Chris Rock. But it's one of those things, right? People can lose their cool, and so I mean to condemn the guy forever and sort of all these big sort of things against him when the person that he clonked is actually now benefiting up the yin yang from it, is going to give him material for years to come now of jokes and all kinds of stuff. It's sort of it's more like he's not suffering really from this whatsoever, and I doubt his jaw is that sort of sore from it, right? A sort of thing like that. So, to me, I'm not on the massively. I don't think he should have done that to Chris Rock, and I like Chris Rock, and I think he's funny. But I mean, that's sort of you know, it seems like he's going to be the one who's going to end up benefiting the most here, sort of thing. Like, and I certainly don't agree that you fakely take away somebody's Oscar because they did some stupid movement later. You voted for his best acting ability, sort of thing. You're not voting for, yeah, you know what I mean, what somebody does on their sideline. Yeah, you know what I mean. If you wanted to get into that, I mean, three-quarters of the geniuses from yeah, you know, Robin Williams, all the gang, lots of those guys did some pretty wild sort of stuff and some pretty wild drugs back in the day and these kinds of things like that. I mean, if you wanted to go these routes, I mean, you could sort of pretty well three-quarters of the actors out there, they could remove their Grammy for something that they've done at one time or another. Like the Kramer episode. I mean, look at the guy for ages there, most popular guy in Seinfeld, people laughing their heads off. And I mean, his career has never been the same ever, all because a pile of hecklers kept bugging him and he lost his cool and said the word he shouldn't have, right? Yet you'll see sort of other people saying these same sort of jokes and nobody even blinks an eye at it. If it's like if you're, there's this guy here that gets away with this stuff all the time. This I don't even find him funny, but I mean this there's this Indian comedian, and this guy makes fun of all these sorts of groups because he can get away with it because he is one, right? So he has this sort of masking here where now he can bug anybody and nobody can, then it's fine. But if a white guy said the same sort of thing, then all of a sudden they'd be a terrorist and a racist, right? So these things, we all need to sort of have a little bit sort of a, like in the old days, like what I'm used to, when we could debate with each other and not get too hot headed. We could joke about each other and not get too hot headed and that sort of thing. But in today's times, people, it seems, are a little bit more over too sensitive and that sort of thing like that. So, anyways, stay tuned for some next shows. And sorry about any inconvenience the last time there. And we'll try and fix up any videos that we have that are a bit messed up and try and fix them up as fast as possible. And thanks for watching and stay tuned and have a nice day. Bye for now.